the world as a place in which people behave. And so the stories help us understand how people behave, but they also help us understand how people must and should behave, given that they have a certain nature and that they have to organize their behavior with other people. And so that puts a set of very serious constraints on how it is that people can exist in the world. The stories basically take two forms, and one form is the description of people acting in motivated states of one form or another, and those are usually motivated states that everyone is familiar with. Most stories, whether they're archaic or modern, have to do with exploration and adventure or romance, and the reason for that is that we're biologically constructed so that we're adventuresome, exploratory, and interested in intimate relationships. And so the stories reflect that, and they help us understand how those fundamental motivations could be manifested in behavior in a manner that's productive, partly for each individual, and then partly for the individuals in relationship to other individuals and to families and to broader communities. The other form of story that seems to be of critical importance from a historical perspective is stories that describe transformation. And transformation tends to be represented as using symbolism that's associated with death and rebirth. And the reason for that seems to be that almost inevitably, when you learn something new, you learn it because something that you're doing or something that you're using to structure your perceptions no longer works. And so it produces a result that you don't intend. And because of that, before you can learn to restructure your behavior, you have to allow yourself to let go of the things that you're doing that are in error. And those can be small things in situations where only a small correction is required, but sometimes they can be very large things. And if they're very large things, then it's as if there's a large element of your personality or yourself that has to degenerate and transform itself into chaos and then reemerge, hopefully restructured. And the archaic stories about death and rebirth and the transfiguration of the soul are stories about the necessity of dissolution and disintegration preceding ascent. And it's a very useful thing to know because it means, first of all, that you're going to be resistant to learning things as you progress through life, because every time you learn something, you have to let go of something that you hold dear before you can reconstruct yourself. And so that accounts for people's unwillingness to learn things and unwillingness to face facts that aren't in accordance with their current view of the world. But it also helps you understand that it might be worth letting go of the things that you're doing that aren't productive, because even if it's painful in the short term, the consequence might be the kind of personality transformation that stops you from having to suffer stupidly as you move through life. I mean, one of the reasons that I entitled this course Personality and Its Transformations is because the transformation part of the study of personality is probably more important than the study of personality traits themselves. This is part of the reason why, for example, Piaget thought it was much more important to learn how it was that people learned things than it was to learn what they were learning. So he was more concerned about the process by which people generate information and transform their personalities than he was in determining the nature of whatever theory it was that people happened to be using to interact with the world at a particular historical stage or at a particular developmental stage. And I think one of the things that's most important to learn from archaic stories, which is where we started this, is that it's much more it's much more useful to envision yourself as something that can continually transform in response to challenge than it is to view yourself as the static embodiment of any particular strategy of knowledge or perception. And you know, one of the things that you'll see quite frequently, and you certainly see this in universities now, I think perhaps you see that in universities more than you see it anywhere else, is that people adopt a static ideological stance on the world, and they try to interpret everything that happens in the world through the lens of that static ideology. They try to compress the entire world into that particular theoretical framework and become extraordinarily upset when the phenomena that confront them don't fit in accordance with the ideology. And the reason that people do that is because they identify themselves with their ideological beliefs and their static ideological beliefs instead of identifying themselves with the part of their personality that's capable of continually assimilating new information and accommodating to it or transforming. And you're a much more powerful person if you can understand that what's most essential to you is your capacity to transmute and transform as challenges come towards you, rather than your ability to develop a coherent and all-encompassing totalitarian theory and attempt to impose it on the world.